All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick's Strength and Power. So today I wanted to make a video about a bodybuilder by the name of Shawn Ray. So many of you may know Shawn Ray for his role or his job today as being a bodybuilding reporter for Muscular Development magazine. Now, because of his current job, there's a lot of people that dislike him because of some of his opinions and some of the things he said as a reporter. And because of that, it's kind of affected how people viewed him as a bodybuilder as well. So for this video, let's set aside the fact that Shawn Ray is now a bodybuilding reporter. Let's set aside some of the things he said, and let's look at what he's accomplished as a bodybuilder during his career. So to be honest with you guys, in my opinion, I think Shawn Ray is one of the best bodybuilders to come out of the 90s without a doubt, and possibly one of the best bodybuilders of all time, of a lower height and a lower weight. So obviously he was a shorter bodybuilder and smaller stature overall. So he was 5'5", or 1.65 meters. His weight was about 215 to 225 pounds, or 93 to 102.1 kilograms. So during his career, Shawn Ray achieved a lot of things, but one of the things that sticks out to me the most in his career, one of the most eventful things, was the 1990 Arnold Classic. So this was a very interesting year for bodybuilding. So 1990 was the year that both the Arnold Classic and the Mr. Olympia competition decided to drug test their competitors. Now, obviously, drug testing the Olympia and the Arnold Classic is a very fascinating concept because clearly the vast majority of bodybuilders within the IFBB during the 90s were obviously using some performance-enhancing drugs. But in 1990, they drug tested the Arnold Classic, and that was the year that Shawn Ray happened to win the Arnold Classic. So the part about this that sucks for Shawn is the fact that he won the competition. He was given the title, he had dinner with Arnold, he was given the trophy, he was given the prize money, and found out a week or multiple weeks after the fact that he had failed the drug test and he would have to give back the trophy and the prize money. And he was going to be stripped of his title. So they ended up stripping him of that title and they gave it to Mike Christian, who claims to be a natural IFBB pro. And Mike did happen to pass the drug test, but that's a topic for another video on whether or not Mike was actually natural. So unfortunately, 1990 was just a bad year for bodybuilding in general and a very bad year for Shawn Ray. Now, the reason for all this drug testing was because in 1990, the Anabolic Steroids Control Act was passed. So essentially, the IFBB wanted to look like they were compliant with this law and paying attention to what was going on. So that's essentially the catalyst for the drug testing of the 1990 Olympia and Arnold Classic. Overall, just kind of a bad year for bodybuilding. But luckily for Shawn Ray, he would come back the next year where the competition was not drug tested, and he would win the Arnold Classic the following year. And this was in the very early days of the Arnold Classic. You got to remember the Arnold Classic started in 1989. So 1990 was only the second annual Arnold Classic ever held. 1991, Shawn Ray won the third Arnold Classic ever held. So since the Arnold Classic is the second most prestigious show next to the Olympia, you kind of have to hold Shawn in very high regard, like we hold Larry Scott and Sergio Oliva, the first two winners of the Mr. Olympia competition. Shawn Ray was technically one of the founding winners of the Arnold Classic, so he was one of the really early champions of that show. So really, he was one of the, really one of the big names of the 90s. It was a really big deal that he won the Arnold Classic back then. So we got to give him props for that. Now, in addition to this unfortunate drug testing incident, there's another thing about his career that I think stands out, and this is probably even bigger than the drug testing thing, but I think the drug testing thing is more memorable, in my opinion. So he was a top 5 Mr. Olympia finalist for 12 consecutive years. Over a decade, he placed in the top 5 at the Olympia, which is an accomplishment that no other bodybuilder has achieved to this day. Of those Olympia placings, I think the two most impressive placings, both in terms of how high the placings were and who they were against, the two most impressive, in my opinion, were the 1994 and the 1996 Mr. Olympia competition. So both of these years, Shawn Ray placed second to the legendary Dorian Yates. So Dorian Yates, the original mass monster, who weighed probably at least 50 pounds more than Shawn Ray. Despite that size difference, Shawn Ray was able to come in conditioned enough to have good enough lines, proportions, aesthetics to just overwhelm Dorian to the point where he could compare very, very favorably, despite the fact that Dorian had all this mass. Now, granted, he never beat Dorian Yates and won the Olympia title, but this is why he was called the Giant Killer, because Dorian Yates was the original mass monster, but Shawn Ray was so conditioned and looked so good that he compared very, very favorably next to Dorian Yates, again, despite the fact that Dorian had all this mass. So let me read you guys all of Shawn Ray's Mr. Olympia placings, because they are a very impressive list. So his very first Olympia was the 1988 Mr. Olympia, where he placed 13th. In 1990, at that drug-tested Olympia, he placed 3rd. 1991, 5th place. And again, 1991 was the year that he won the Arnold Classic. 4th place in 1992. 3rd place in 1993. 2nd place in 1994. 4th place in 1995. 2nd place in 1996. 3rd place in 1997. 5th place in 1998. 5th place in 1999. 4th place in 2000, 4th place in 2001. So whether you love Shawn or hate him as a person, you got to admit that is one of the most impressive Mr. Olympia resumes, aside from winning the Mr. Olympia, of all time. I mean, that's a very, very impressive resume. It's also important to consider that Shawn Ray is one of the youngest pro bodybuilders of all time in terms of turning pro, and back then he was the youngest pro. So at the age of 21, he won nationals and got his pro card, making him the youngest pro. And at that first Olympia he competed in 1988, he was only 22 years old when he got that 13th place finish. So the only finish that he had that was outside of the top 5 was when he was 22 years old. So again, not too shabby for his Olympia record there. So after that 2001 Olympia where he placed 4th, for some reason he decided to retire at the age of 36. So relative to other bodybuilders, 36 is relatively young. A lot of people say that bodybuilders don't hit their prime until their mid to late 30s. So who knows, maybe Shawn Ray could have kept competing and had some good years left in him and continued to place within that top 5. I certainly think that his physique was still good enough as of 2001 that he probably could have kept competing for a couple of years. Although Ronnie Coleman, you're kind of in the Coleman era, about to go into the Jay Cutler era. Two guys who are very, very big. Their conditioning was usually very, very good. So these were guys that were probably going to be tough for him to ever topple at the Olympia. So like I said before, Shawn Ray is currently a writer for MD, a reporter for MD. He works for MD, and because of that capacity, it seems like there's a lot of people who dislike him for his opinions and some of the things he says. But honestly, as a bodybuilder, I think he's one of the greatest bodybuilders of all time. Certainly one of the greatest bodybuilders of the 90s. And another thing that he's doing now that I think is interesting is he has a daughter named Asia, and she was on the show Dance Moms. I don't know if you're familiar with that show. Basically about, the drama of these little girls that are on these dance teams and all the moms and all the, just kind of the gossip and all that stuff. But as a result of his daughter being on Dance Moms, she actually got her own show in 2014 called Raising Asia. And as far as I know, it only ran for 1 season in 2014. Got 13 episodes, and Shawn Ray appeared in some of those episodes. I don't think a lot of people in the bodybuilding community actually knew that his daughter had her own show. But that was pretty cool. I did watch that show with my buddy just because it was Shawn Ray's daughter. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, maybe learned a little bit about Shawn Ray that you did not know before, maybe developed a better opinion of him. Please give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.